Okay, the First Omen, the prequel to the 1976 movie The Omen. This is directed by an Arkasha Stevenson, which I believe is her directorial debut. And when it comes to the trailers for this movie, I've been liking the look of it, sort of the vibe, and that kind of glimpse at the atmosphere that's within this film. I've sort of been kind of really intrigued by. And this film sort of is released shortly after Immaculate. Immaculate was released about 2 weeks ago. I've got a review up for it, and it's a movie that I really enjoyed. It has flaws, but I really liked it, and it's very, very similar to the story of The First Omen. Very similar. So yeah, the synopsis of The First Omen is a young American woman is sent to Rome to begin life of service to the church, but encounters a darkness that causes her to question her faith and uncovers a terrifying conspiracy that hopes to bring about the birth of the Antichrist. And so, by having watched Immaculate not long ago, and then sort of just diving into The First Omen, I couldn't help but just sort of draw comparisons when it comes to the two films. You know, granted, The First Omen is part of an already established franchise, and Immaculate isn't. But because of those two stories being so similar, I just couldn't help but compare the two films. And what I'm going to start off with saying, because these stories are very similar, the two of them have both got their strengths and their weaknesses. I feel Immaculate, with certain aspects of that movie, did things a little bit better than, say, The First Omen. But I do also feel like that The Omen, when it comes to how that movie was crafted, does certain things, slightly better than what they did in Immaculate, maybe. But the one thing they both sort of suffered with, for me personally, was the character, and sort of like, for example, our lead character, who's played by a Nell here in The First Omen. Her performance is fantastic. Like, I bought into this character's sort of vulnerability and sort of what this character is going through. I feel like the way she sort of conveys the character's vulnerability through her performance is great. I bought into this character. And so the performance by Nell is great. I had no issue with that. It felt natural. It felt real. But it was how the character was written. I just wanted a bit more development and depth behind it. Like, yes, we get an understanding of where this character has come from, just like we do with Sydney Sweeney's character in Immaculate. Very similar again there. But I just felt like I needed a bit more to understand the character. But it's the performance, and it's the performance from Nell that really kind of carries this character and sort of just really kind of allows me to remain connected to this character to a degree through this experience. The strongest portions of The First Omen for me was its first act and its third act. The first act starts out quite strong. I really like the way in which they set up the story and introduce us to these characters, including Margarita. You know, there's a real sort of, the way in which they set the movie up with the atmosphere and the tone, it does a really good job of just sort of immersing you into this story, and I was locked in. You know, they do a really good job at creating this sense of dread and this kind of like, you know, this feeling of impending doom. And it's a very eerie atmosphere that's quite unsettling, and you get sort of glimpses to sort of what's going on behind the scenes. And when it comes to the imagery as well, like, I really liked a lot of the imagery and sort of how this film looked from a technical perspective when it comes to the cinematography. I thought it was quite powerful, and it does sort of elevate that kind of uneasiness and that atmosphere that I feel the film requires. And so from a technical perspective, it is working for me, and it's doing the job. You know, I would just love how the camera would focus on our characters during certain moments, and it would sort of really kind of like, there was a sort of very earthy, grounded kind of tone to the movie as a result of this, due to sort of the images that we had on screen. And there's this one shot where you've got our lead, it's in the trailers, Margarita, she's praying, and as the camera pans out, you've got these sort of candles positioned in a way that looks like the jaws of a creature. Like, there's a lot of this powerful, striking imagery throughout the movie that I think really does a good job at kind of immersing us into this very kind of almost like gritty, seedy, grounded story, which at some point will become quite fantastical, maybe, if that's one way of putting it. And so this experience, kind of like Immaculate, became a little bit frustrating because the film is trying to do something different with this story. This doesn't want to be you could just tell the filmmakers don't want this film to be just another prequel to a well-known franchise. And you can see that with the story and these characters. And just, there is definitely a lot of love there for this material, for the horror genre in general. And just, you can feel that in how the film is crafted. Unfortunately, it becomes more evident within the second act, going into the third act, that it is, in many ways, also trying too hard to be part of the Omen franchise. For me, it tries too hard to emulate the Omen movie. And what I mean by that is the way in which the film is shot, even though I really dug it, there's just a lot of moments within this film that you can kind of tell they want to remind us that this is an Omen movie. And one of the things I really hate that prequels and sequels do is sort of use certain kind of familiar or classic lines from previous movies within that franchise. And they do it here with the First Omen. There's only one line from what I can remember. And it actually works within the context of what's going on. It wasn't enough to sort of really throw me out of the experience. But at the same time, I'm like, do you know what? They're doing such a good job at creating something that's unique and different. Yes, it's within a certain franchise, but they were doing such a good job at wanting to create something different that could stand on its own, but they still had to include this one classic line from the original 1976 movie, and I just couldn't help but still have that kind of nagging sensation of, you know, that feeling of why? Like, why did you have to do that? I understand it's going to please a lot of those fans of the original movie, including myself, and granted, it does work well within the context of this moment, but at the same time, it sort of reminded me that, oh, we're watching an Omen prequel as well. And I felt like perhaps there could have been something, perhaps a bit more original within that moment. So there's a lot of aspects I liked, you know, when it came to the technical aspect, that, you know, and how the story is crafted, when it comes to the performances, certain performances actually, I'll come back to that. But yeah, it just, yeah, and then unfortunately, and it's, again, going back to Immaculate, like, one of my frustrations with that film was it unfortunately falls into that kind of gravity well, as I referred to it as being, of genericness. Like, there is this kind of, these horror films now today, we've seen these stories so many times, they're so familiar, that yes, you could really try to do something different and bold, but sometimes you kind of got to watch that trap of falling into that, of being that kind of, you know, generic horror movie with all those kind of classic horror tropes. And as a result of this film trying too hard to be an Omen prequel, it does sometimes fall into that trap of us watching, or ended up being in an experience that is generic. It is very familiar, and you've got those classic horror tropes. And yeah, so just going back to the performances for a moment, I didn't love everyone's performance. Bill Nighy. I love Bill Nighy as an actor, but for me personally, he was massively miscast here as Cardinal Lawrence, and his performance just didn't work for me. There was something about his performance that was almost kind of cartoonish, and perhaps, yeah, it just wasn't really working for me. And so I kind of dreaded when, as soon as I knew that we were going to get Bill Nighy for a certain moment or scene, I was like, oh no, because at that point, the certain, whatever moment it might have been, was working in terms of atmosphere and tone. But then as soon as we'd get Bill Nighy's character, I'm like, oh no, because there was just something that he was doing with this character that just was just not working for me. And yeah, and I just wish we'd had a bit more of Ralph Ineson's character, Father Brennan. He plays a pivotal part within the story, but I just kind of wanted a bit more of his character, because I feel like at times it kind of just felt a little bit tacked on when his character was included, so just move the plot along. But I just found, I dug his performance. Again, I like Ralph Ineson as an actor, and I liked what he was doing with the character. I just found myself wanting more of him. And I loved the score by Mark Corven. he attempts to do something different, yet it's still got that DNA of the classic original Omen score. You know, the DNA is there, but he's also doing something different with his score. And then you get the classic familiar Omen theme in the third act, and it's great because it comes at a moment which, do you know what, it sent chills down my spine, and I think the music just really sort of helps elevate that moment, and that kind of sort of leads me into the strong third act. And I felt like there was a lot that I really liked about the third act, and I felt like it was perhaps a bit more impactful in a different way to how Immaculate was. Like, the conclusion to Immaculate challenged me emotionally, but when it comes to the First Omen, it was a lot more unsettling. I feel like they achieved that kind of feeling of being unsettled, you know, getting under the skin, and just there's this moment, I'm not going to say too much because this is spoiler free, and it's done in a way just through how the camera is utilised and through the sound design and so the lighting and the score, and it is incredibly unsettling. And then you get that moment and the classic Omen theme kicks in, and it's like, fuck yeah, this is great, and it does what it needed to do. But, like, you know, as I've said, it was a bit of a frustrating experience up until this point because I felt like it was quite inconsistent with what it wanted to be and what it knew it had to be, as, you know, by being part of a franchise. I did like this movie. I did enjoy it. There's a lot of things that I liked about it from a sort of a technical perspective, and when it comes to certain performances and just what it was they were trying to do with the story, I really appreciated. But I do feel like it gets kind of weighed down or bogged down by it trying to remind us that this is also an Omen prequel or a part of the Omen franchise. And sort of like a lot of that kind of those familiar moments within the movie, even when it comes to that one line, and sort of how it sort of in many ways tries to emulate the first Omen movie. It kind of loses at the same time what it is they're also trying to do with its story, and I just feel like it needed to strip itself back a little bit more and just maybe focus more on our main character, our lead character of Margarita, played beautifully, by the way, by Nell Tiger Free. I mean, she is fantastic, and I just feel like it needed it to have a bit more of a human story behind it and sort of be less conscious of this being part of a bigger franchise, because then I feel like that third act could have been a hell of a lot more effective than it already was, and it could have had more of a mystery to it. And, you know, yes, we know this is a prequel to the Omen and it's going to kind of tie into it, but I just feel like it could have stripped a lot of those layers from it, which stops it from falling into that kind of generic familiar territory that I mentioned. So yeah, they are my thoughts on the first Omen. I do recommend it. I feel like it's a strong prequel. It's a good movie. It's not unwatchable. But I feel like there's certain aspects to its story and what it was doing with its characters and sort of certain kind of revelations and twists, which I think perhaps could have been handled a little bit better to stop itself from falling into kind of generic familiar territory. But yeah, they are my thoughts on the first Omen. Enough rambling on from me, and I will be giving the first Omen a 7 out of 10. So yeah, they are my thoughts on the first Omen, but what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future reviews from just some random Welsh geek ramble on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. So yeah, again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to all those that have subscribed over the last couple of weeks. It means an awful lot to me. My goal this year is to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year. I'm currently sat at 319, and that means the world to me. Like I keep on saying, I can't believe so many of you would want to follow just some random Welsh geek ramble on about film. But yeah, it does mean an awful lot. So thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it. I'll be catching you guys soon.